My grandpa, a retired homicide detective, wanted me to share another one of his cases to celebrate Halloween. Apologies for the delay. When I posted the last 3 entries, my grandpa was elated. We spent so much time going over the comments, and it brought him a joy I haven't seen in a long time. His health took a brief turn for the worse in recent weeks, and he made me promise not to post any more transcriptions of our conversations without him being able to sit down with me and watch the comments roll in. I kept that promise. Luckily, he's back to where he was when we started this whole thing, which still isn't great, but it's better than he has been recently, and I'm proud to present the fourth impossible case. It's not always people, you know. The impossible ones weren't limited to just people. Back in the late 80s, early 90s maybe, we caught a call. A suspected murder had taken place. Mail had filled up the mailbox. Eventually, someone called the police for a wellness check. Some uniforms go to check, look through the window, and they see blood on the living room carpet and ceiling. They go in, clear the house, we get called. I remember the phone call. It was the same as the calls for the impossible cases. Yeah, Grandpa's name. It's another one. We could always tell how shitty our day was going to be by the tone of voice of whoever called us. It was me and a temporary partner I had. This guy Malloy, he'd come over from across the state, but like every detective, he was familiar with the impossible ones, though he said at his last shop, they were referred to as the unexplained. Different name, but the same mind-boggling bullshit. Anyways, we pull up to the house and find everyone standing outside it. We get out of the car, thinking they're just trying to preserve the scene, but then we see that everyone is real on edge, jumping when we shut our doors, staring at the ground. You know, just acting real antsy. We ask them what's going on, but no one will say a word. We go around asking if the house has been cleared, and finally a uniformed, looked like his first day on the job, nods his head a little bit. Malloy and I go in the house, and, you know, it looks normal. Just a normal suburban house. There was a stain on the living room carpet, and it was very clearly blood. It was made all the more obvious by the fact that there was blood dripping from the ceiling. You ever seen a ceiling with flood damage, where it looks like dropping a feather on it from the other side is going to make it come crashing down? That's how the spot above the stain was. It was dark red and looked thin as wet tissue. So obviously we think there must be a body upstairs. Based on the call we got and how the folks outside were acting, we were expecting something real, you know, something real gruesome. We go upstairs, figure out which room the stain is below, but when we walk in, there's nothing. Room is normal. Not 2 seconds after we open that door, that's when we first hear it. Tap, 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 tap. The best way I can describe it is like they tapped their pinky, then a half second later their ring finger, then middle index thumb, boom, 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 real fast. Malloy and I both spin around. It sounded like someone was tapping on the wall in the room across the hall from the one we were in. Now, the door to that room is closed. We'd been informed that this woman lived by herself. Didn't have any kids, no husband, not even any family that lived in the state. So there shouldn't be anyone else there. Malloy and I draw our weapons, start doing the whole open the door, show us your hands, yada 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 thing. But no one responds. We stand there long enough with our weapons pointed at the wall. I was pointing at the door. Malloy had his trained on the wall. We stand there long enough and don't hear anything back that we start wondering if we just heard something from outside or something. The unis had cleared the house, and they'd never done us wrong before. But with how weird they were acting, we wanted to be sure. Just as I start to take a step to pass Malloy and move toward the other room, we hear it again. Tap, 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 tap. Only this time, it sounded like it was in the room on the other side of the wall from the one we were in. You know, on the same side of the hall, just a door down. I yell out, "Police! Step out into the hallway with your hands up!" And again, no response. Tap, 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 tap. This one comes from the opposite wall from the previous one, which would put whoever was doing it on the steps leading upstairs. Malloy was still standing in the doorway, so he took a step and leaned over to take a look, then looked over to me and shook his head. There wasn't anyone there. The next set of taps, that same pattern, they came from above us, like in the attic. Then, higher up on the wall by the stairs, then down the hall, then from underneath my feet, like someone was tapping on the ceiling in the living room, then back on the wall in the opposite room, over and over and over and over and over and over. Sounded like a miniature stampede was happening all around us. It lasted about 30 seconds. Then as quickly as it started, it just stopped. Malloy and I stood there for a good 10 minutes, guns up, arms aching, wondering what the hell was going on. When we both finally calmed down enough to act rationally, we went through and cleared the house again. Attic, top floor, ground floor, basement. We did it ourselves just to make sure it got done thoroughly, and there was no one. House was empty except for us. So then we have to deal with the fact that the ceiling in the living room is leaking blood. But there doesn't seem to be a source. The bedroom, where the leak should have been, where the body should have been, there was a throw rug in there, over the hardwood floor. So we move the rug. There's a little, door type thing. I guess you'd call it. A little door in the floor, maybe the size of a pack of cigarettes, with a hinge that's flush with the floor. I open it, shine a flashlight in, but there's nothing there. No source for where the blood could be coming from, and even after we had some guys come in and take out the floorboards, I took out the insulation and it was dry. The material that made up the ceiling, while it was soaked with blood on the bottom of it, it was completely dry on top. Which, I mean, it's impossible. It's like the source of the blood was in between a half-inch thick piece of plaster. That was a hell of a long day, I'll tell you. So it's late now. Probably 2:30 in the morning. Malloy and I are still at the house looking around. We finally got a few people to come in, fingerprint folks, photographers. They're getting their jobs done. Me and Malloy are standing in the kitchen when he goes, "Did you hear that?" I hadn't heard a thing. He goes, "There it is again." I'm straining my ears trying to hear what he's hearing, and when I turn to look at him and ask what he thinks he's hearing, I won't lie to you. My heart skipped a beat. Malloy was standing there, staring straight ahead into my eyes. But it was like he was looking through me. His face had gone completely limp, slack, and his eyes looked like they'd been turned off, like there was no life behind them. His mouth hung open like he was just totally brain dead. "Malloy?" I say. He just stared through me to the point that I looked over my shoulder to make sure no one was behind me. When I turned back around, Malloy was pointing to the basement door. I looked over and saw that it was closed. When I looked back again, Malloy was pointing, but the life had returned to his face. He looked normal. I asked Malloy what the hell had happened, and he just said, "You didn't hear that?" I told him I hadn't. He said we needed to check the basement again. We head over and open the door, only now the lights wouldn't turn on. They'd worked fine the entire day, but all of a sudden now, nothing. We get our flashlights out and head down. I asked him why we're checking the basement again, but he just kept saying, "We need to check the basement again. You didn't hear that?" We get down there, and everything looks the same as it had all day. Tap, 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 tap. The taps sounded like they were against one of the metal racks that lined the basement walls. We shine our lights all around. There's nothing. No one. Tap, 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 tap. This time it sounds like it's on a cardboard box. "You didn't hear that?" Malloy says again. The tapping starts all around us. It's on metal, cardboard, plastic, wood, drywall, plaster. It gets to the point that it's deafening. I shine my light all around, and it eventually lands on Malloy, who had at some point moved to the corner. He had that same dead look on his face again, and he was pointing towards the ceiling, just behind me. I consider myself something of a brave man. But in that moment, I was about as scared as I could have been. I did not want to look behind me. It felt like something was there, looking at me, waiting for me to turn around. "You didn't hear that?" Malloy said again. "You didn't hear that? You didn't hear that? You didn't hear that? You didn't hear that? You didn't hear that?" He just kept repeating it, over and over and over. Then he started slurring his words like he'd sound if he was drunk. I'm yelling out at him to shut his mouth, scared out of my mind. And so there's already been a lot of this that makes you scratch your head, Say what the hell? But then, I can tell my grandpa is reliving this in his head. I worked up enough courage to turn around. The Malloy was still repeating that over and over, but I turned around and looked up towards where he was pointing. And there was a spot of the plaster in the basement ceiling that was newer than the rest of it. The same size as that little door in the floor on the second level. We'd been through the house more times than I can remember, and neither of us had noticed that door until now, which seemed unlikely. The tapping seems to be getting louder, faster. I got Malloy yelling over and over, and I'm so afraid, I think I might piss myself. It gets so loud that I cover my ears, start hunching over. I mean, it sounded like you could have heard it on the other side of the neighborhood. Then it all stopped again. I looked over to Malloy and saw him sobbing into his hands. Then he walked up the basement stairs without saying a word. I wanted to get the hell out of there, but at the same time, I didn't want to skimp on my duties. I yelled up the stairs for a few of the construction guys to come down and take down the entire piece of plaster that spot was on. They unscrewed the screws, and when one side of the piece was lower than the others, a little bag slides out and falls to the ground. The bag had fingers in it, 3 fingers. If I remember right, they were. It was an index, ring, and pinky finger. We eventually went back upstairs, and when we did, there were spots like the one in the basement all over the place. The ceiling in the living room had stopped bleeding. But now we had more of these spots. Must have been 5 or 6 on each level of the house. Inside each were bags of fingers, formed pinky to thumb. We had them all tested, and far as we could tell, at least some of them belonged to previous owners of the house, going back decades. Turns out that everyone who'd lived in the house had died. One of them was a suicide, but the rest were natural causes. It was odd because all the fingers were in perfect condition, like they'd just been removed from the body, and decomp hadn't started yet. Doesn't make any goddamn sense. Malloy, that poor bastard. He quit the job the following day, refused to talk about what was going on in his head during that day. He tried committing suicide twice that I know of. Now he lives with his daughter in Monterey, California. In the few years after that day, I tried to check in on him from time to time, and he would apparently have these fits where he just screams, "You didn't hear that!" over and over. I was supposed to go back to that house a few days later. I showed up, and when I got to the front door, I just couldn't do it. That fear set in again. Made me feel like I was going to pass out. I knew right from the jump this one didn't have an answer. I still did my due diligence. Did what I could to find some answers, but I refused to go back in that house. Oh, and the woman? One who lived there? A neighbor down the street had seen her walking the morning we got the call, so several days after she'd stopped getting her mail for whatever reason, even though she was apparently home, she'd walked down the street and onto the main road. We'd tracked her security tapes, but she turned the corner from North Avenue on 92nd Street and just vanished. Poof. Into thin air. Wondered for a long time what happened to her. Then one day, almost 7 years later, we get a tape in the mail. It had been sent to the precinct, addressed to both me and Malloy. It was a security tape from a gas station. The timestamp was the day after we'd been to her house, so the day after she'd vanished, about 2 hours after. Across the street from the gas station, some folks were doing some tree work. That woman had walked up to the area these folks were doing the work, set her purse down with her ID on top of it, leaned forward, and went headfirst into a wood chipper. Messed up, right? Well, even more messed up than that, the tape came from a gas station in Florida, about 1,200 miles. Never did figure out how she got from the corner of 92nd and North to Tampa Bay, Florida in under 2 hours. A couple days later, I went back to my grandpa's, and he got me immediately excited for his next case. You know, I should probably tell you about the very first impossible case I ever had. Both my grandfather and I appreciate everyone's well wishes, truly more than words can express. Posting these stories has become something he gets excited to do. In his words, knowing I can finally get the word out on all the weird shit that goes on in this world, not having to worry about the department biting me in the ass, it's good. It feels good. I know I won't be kicking around much longer, but if these folks really enjoy reading about the cases, I can't think of a better way to spend the rest of my time until I punch my ticket. Make sure you tell them thanks from the old guy with the weird stories. So the very first one, the first impossible one, that was, what? 76? 77? Somewhere in there. Around a year after I made detective. Anyways, I'm sitting at my desk when the sergeant comes up and whispers something to my partner. This guy Manthe, I think I told you about him before. You know what happened to him. So Sarge whispers to Manthe and heads back to his office. Manthe just kind of hangs his head a bit. I ask him what's going on and he stands up and tells me to follow him. We go to the car, and on our way to wherever we're going, he gives me a little speech. Now, I'm paraphrasing here. I've been a detective 11 years now, Steve. My grandpa said it was fine if I used his name. I've solved a lot of cases. I'm not the best detective there's ever been, but I'm damn good at my job. Generally speaking, if there's a murder, I'll get the guy or gal. One time it even ended up being a dog, but you get what I mean. But sometimes, he says, sometimes there's cases you can't solve, no matter how good you are. Sometimes things just won't make a lick of sense. The clues will take you to a dead end. The evidence will just raise more questions. You know when you do a puzzle? Sometimes you'll have the box there so you can see what you're supposed to be putting together. It's like you're doing a puzzle. You know what it should look like. You got all the pieces on the table in front of you, but they just don't go together. There's no reason why. They just don't. The department doesn't like word of these getting out. You're not under any obligation to not talk about them. Don't think I'm trying to scare you or anything. They prefer to keep them quiet. Don't want to scare the people, you know? We got a name for M around the department. Just a dumb little name. We call them the impossible ones. Because that's what they are. No two ways about it. They're impossible. You might have heard someone mention them before. I had. I'd heard the term impossible one in passing. Never really knew what it was about. So Steve says, we're headed to one now. I knew it was just a matter of time until we caught one. Sarge got the details from some of the unis down there. We drove out to Oak Creek, you know, the farmland out there. We had to drive down this long dirt road between two giant plots of corn stalks. And finally, this house comes into view. Got the black and whites parked all around it. Yellow tape. The whole deal. We pull up and the lieutenant was there, which, you know, I wasn't used to that. Manthe tells me, whenever we get a weird one, they send out a higher up. LT just shakes his head and tells us, good luck. So, you know, we walk past the tape. Everybody's out there doing their jobs. There's a group crowded around this big flagpole they have. We're walking up to the house to talk to the responding officers, And I overheard some folks talking about how it just doesn't make sense. How is it possible? Stuff like that. So right away, I'm getting that something is off, but I still don't know why we're even there. We get in the house and a few unis are standing in the foyer. This house, it was it wasn't a nice place. There were no walls or, well, no drywall. It was just the slats. Like someone had started building the house but given up halfway through. We go up and ask for a rundown of what's happened, and two of the officers tell us to follow them upstairs. One of the unis says, "I've been on the job about 2 years. I've seen some messed up things, but this has got to be the worst." They take us up to a bedroom on the second floor, and before we turn to go in, the uni says, "Brace yourself." I don't remember what I was expecting exactly. Probably a whole lot of blood, Gus. Something like that. But there wasn't any. There was no mess. The room was absolutely immaculate, like they'd gone over it with a toothbrush just before we walked in. The bedroom was empty except for a small, almost like a TV tray. That stands up? Yeah, there's one of those, and there's medical supplies on it. Bandages, wraps, scalpels, scissors, sutures, all of them clean as a whistle. But the body, there was a body on the floor, sort of halfway leaning against the wall. The feet had been sewn on. They were much paler than the rest of his body, like the feet clearly came from another person. Again, there was no blood, but at the same time, there was evidence that the operation, if you want to call it that, happened in that very room. Weirder yet, one of his hands had also been stitched on, but just one of them. This body's right hand, it belonged to its original owner, and it had a stitching needle and thread in it, like the son of a bitch had been doing this to himself. Problem was, his feet and hand, the ones that actually belonged to him, were nowhere to be found. As freaky as this was, it was the smell that was the worst. It was the most rank, putrid, dead body smell I've ever encountered, and I've smelled quite a few. Now, later, they did an autopsy. The cause of death couldn't be determined, but the level of decomp on the outside was, hours by the time Manthe and I showed up on the scene. I don't remember what the call was or, how it was found out that there was a potential murder there. But when we showed up, the body was still fresh. They did the autopsy not long after that, and the decomp on the inside of the body, his organs and all that, at least a month, like he'd been sitting against that wall for a month. Now, I don't know how much you know about human decomp. Hopefully not much, but it happens in stages. Right after a person dies, first few days, not too much happens. Then they'll start bloating and all that. After about a week, the skin will start to turn black. And like I said, none of this had happened yet. But on the inside, a little after a week, things will start breaking down: maggots, bugs, insects, all that. They'll start laying eggs, feeding off the organs. And the organs, they'll start breaking down, leak out of the body. Sounds gross, I know. But, so the outside of the body was fine, as far as decomposition, but the inside of the body was just, I don't know how to put it. It was just flakes, like dried fruit, his lungs, spleen, kidneys, bladder, stomach. It was all decomposed, covered in creepy crawlers. It didn't make any sense. It was, drumroll, impossible. And even more than that, you know how I said the room was perfectly clean? Not a drop of blood? It's because the body had been completely exsanguinated. I mean completely. The body shouldn't have looked the way it did on the outside considering what had happened on the inside. If I wouldn't have seen it with my own eyes, I would have sworn to you it was like a wax statue or something, but that's not the weirdest thing. Not to me, at least. So, outside, when we pulled up, there was that group of unis gathered around the flagpole. When we were done, looking around the inside of the house, trying to make heads or tails of what happened, the folks that brought us into the house told us to follow them out. We get down to the flagpole, and this thing is big. Must have been 25, 30 feet tall, big as the kind you'd see at a school. We walk up and kind of get everyone to clear a path for us so we can see what all the commotion is about. Manthe was walking ahead of me, and I just hear him say, "Jesus fucking Christ." I look around him and I see what everyone is looking at. There is a body at the base of the flagpole. I don't mean next to it. I don't mean near it. The flagpole had gone through the man's lower sternum. Blood had pooled around the area, and by the looks of it, the man hadn't been dead longer than a few hours. Now, after the fact, we had learned that the flagpole had been on that property since the 1960s. At least on paper, it hadn't been replaced or anything since then. There were two flags at the top, an American flag and our state flag. Both of them were blowing in the wind, and they were clean. Besides the normal weather where a flag gets, they were both clean. And so was the flagpole. A little dirt here and there, maybe, but for a body to have impaled by it, and for it to have slid down the flagpole, Both it and the flags should have been covered in blood and guts, and there was no way anyone had lifted the flagpole from the ground and then dropped it on him. There was just no way. Craziest thing about that one? Guy had died from a brain aneurysm. And before I forget, the guy on the flagpole was the owner of the property. The guy inside, sewing on new hands and feet for himself? Never identified, and neither were his new extremities. My grandpa then said, "Well, now you know the first one. Next time you come over, I'll tell you about the very last one. Don't worry, though, there's still a few in between them." I was also considering putting a call out to some colleagues. I'm sure there's cases in other states and departments even I've never heard of. There are 2 more parts. If needed, I will make the next video. Thanks for watching.